In a landmark decision that will echo for years to come, the Supreme Court struck down the Trump-era tariffs, sending shockwaves through the world of international trade and American economic policy. By overturning these tariffs, the court dismantled a key pillar of the America First economic agenda, a policy that had defined much of the previous administration's approach to global commerce and domestic industry. The 6-3 ruling fundamentally redefines presidential authority over international trade, signaling a decisive shift away from protectionism and toward a more balanced approach. This decision marks a turning point, as the court emphasized the limits of executive power in shaping the nation's economic relationships. Free trade advocates are hailing the decision as a restoration of constitutional order and a victory for checks and balances, while critics warn that it could introduce new uncertainties for American businesses and workers who have relied on tariff protections. The case, known as American Institute for International Steel versus United States, challenged the use of Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, a provision that allowed the president to impose tariffs on the grounds of national security. The court found that the executive branch had overstepped its authority, ruling that there was no credible link between the tariffs imposed and any actual security threats facing the nation. This decision sets a new standard for how national security can be invoked in economic policy. Financial markets responded with optimism as investors and companies anticipated reduced trade friction and a more predictable environment for global commerce. The ruling was seen as a positive signal for international cooperation and economic stability. For years, tariffs on steel, aluminum, and a wide range of Chinese goods had raised costs for American manufacturers and consumers alike, leading to higher prices on everyday products and increased uncertainty for businesses. While supporters of the tariffs claimed they protected American industry and jobs, opponents pointed to widespread supply chain disruptions, retaliatory tariffs from trading partners, and the negative impact on U.S. exports. The Supreme Court's ruling now forces a major recalibration of U.S. trade policy, empowering Congress to reclaim its constitutional role in regulating commerce and setting the terms of America's engagement with the global economy. The Biden administration faces the challenge of crafting a new trade strategy that aligns with this precedent, balancing domestic interests with international obligations and the evolving realities of global trade. The world is watching closely as the United States redefines its economic identity. With this decision, the era of unilateral, presidentially driven trade actions may be coming to an end, ushering in a new chapter of shared power and renewed debate over America's place in the global marketplace. The Trump-era tariffs were introduced as a response to growing concerns that the United States was being treated unfairly in global trade, particularly in its economic relationship with China. Many policymakers and industry leaders argued that existing trade agreements put American businesses and workers at a disadvantage, fueling a sense of urgency for change. The U.S. government accused China of a range of unfair practices, including widespread intellectual property theft, manipulating its currency to gain a trade advantage, and providing heavy subsidies to its own industries. These actions, officials claimed, contributed to the decline of American manufacturing jobs and the closure of factories across the country, sparking economic anxiety in many communities. The tariffs were designed to make imported goods more expensive, encouraging consumers and businesses to buy American-made products instead. By doing so, the administration hoped to boost domestic production, protect key industries, and ultimately reduce the large and persistent U.S. trade deficit with countries like China. To justify tariffs on steel and aluminum, the administration invoked Section 232, arguing that a strong domestic metals industry was essential for national security. This legal provision allowed the government to take action in the name of protecting critical infrastructure and defense capabilities. However, these measures did not just target economic rivals like China. They also affected long-standing allies, straining diplomatic relationships and prompting many countries to retaliate with their own tariffs on American goods, escalating tensions on the global stage. What followed was a broader and more intense trade conflict, often referred to as a trade war, with both the US and China imposing tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. This tit-for-tat escalation created uncertainty for businesses and consumers worldwide. The administration's protectionist approach marked a significant departure from decades of U.S. policy that favored free trade and open markets. This shift sparked heated debates among economists, policymakers, and the public about the long-term consequences for the American economy. While some new trade deals were negotiated in the wake of these tariffs, the overall impact remained a subject of intense debate. The controversy continued until the Supreme Court eventually stepped in, highlighting just how complex and far-reaching the issue of tariffs had become. Legal challenges to the tariffs began immediately, with businesses and importers arguing the president exceeded authority under Section 232. They claimed national security was a pretext for economic protectionism, a power reserved for Congress. Initial lawsuits in the Court of International Trade faced setbacks, as lower courts deferred to the executive on national security. Plaintiffs appealed, focusing on the non-delegation doctrine. Congress cannot hand unchecked power to the president without clear guidelines. The Supreme Court agreed to hear the consolidated case, signaling concern over executive overreach. During oral arguments, justices questioned the broad definition of national security and the erosion of congressional authority. This set the stage for today's landmark ruling, reshaping the balance of power in trade policy. The Supreme Court's majority opinion, led by Chief Justice Roberts, sharply limited presidential power under Section 232. The court found no clear link between steel and aluminum imports and genuine national security threats, rejecting economic competition as a justification. The ruling reasserts Congress's authority over foreign commerce and demands specific, credible national security grounds for future executive action. Dissenting justices warned this could hinder swift responses to real threats, but the majority insisted economic protectionism is Congress's domain. The decision sets a new, higher bar for invoking national security in trade. The Supreme Court's decision sent shockwaves through U.S. industries, creating a ripple effect that was felt from factory floors to corporate boardrooms across the nation. Overnight, uncertainty and anticipation swept through the business community as leaders scrambled to assess the implications for their sectors. Steel and aluminum producers, who had previously been shielded by protective tariffs, suddenly saw their stock prices plunge. These companies now face the daunting prospect of renewed foreign competition, forcing them to rethink their strategies and brace for a more challenging market environment. Financial analysts predict tighter profit margins and warn of tough adjustments ahead for these industries. Many expect layoffs, plant slowdowns, and a renewed focus on efficiency as companies adapt to the new reality. Conversely, industries that rely heavily on steel and aluminum, such as automotive, construction, and broader manufacturing, welcomed the ruling with optimism. For them, the decision promises relief from high input costs and the potential for increased production. Major automakers like Ford and GM saw their stock prices climb as investors anticipated lower material costs and improved profit margins. The mood among these companies was noticeably upbeat, with hopes for increased competitiveness both domestically and abroad. The U.S. International Trade Commission estimated that tariffs had added about $450 to the price of a new car. With their removal, consumers could see some relief at the dealership, and experts believe this could help ease inflationary pressures in the broader economy. Imports of steel and aluminum are expected to rebound, benefiting U.S. ports, shipping companies, and logistics providers. Meanwhile, the European Union signaled it would lift retaliatory tariffs on American goods, opening new opportunities for exporters and strengthening transatlantic trade ties. The Peterson Institute projects a modest but meaningful boost to U.S. GDP as business costs fall and trade flows improve. This could translate into more jobs and investment in the long run. Still, companies must now reconsider their supply chains, weighing the short-term disruptions against the potential for long-term gains. Many are re-evaluating sourcing strategies and inventory management to stay competitive in the evolving landscape. The economic landscape has shifted overnight, ushering in a new era of challenges and opportunities for American industries. For steel and aluminum workers, the ruling brings anxiety. Unions warn of job losses as foreign metals flood the market. The United Steelworkers fear a return to layoffs that haunted the industry pre-tariffs. Yet, for the millions in metal-consuming sectors, prospects brighten. Lower material costs could spur hiring and expansion, especially in auto and appliance manufacturing. A Federal Reserve study found tariff job gains were outweighed by losses elsewhere. Consumers may see relief from inflation, as tariffs acted as a hidden tax on goods from cars to canned food. Economists predict a small but meaningful drop in inflation, though price cuts may take months to reach store shelves. The true impact will depend on how quickly businesses pass on savings. The Supreme Court's decision reshapes America's global economic posture. After years of unilateral tariffs and strained alliances, the U.S. must now operate within stricter legal and constitutional limits. Major trading partners like the EU and Japan welcome the shift toward a rules-based system. The U.S. approach now aligns more closely with other democracies, emphasizing targeted, evidence-based trade measures and multilateral cooperation. The ruling also weakens U.S. leverage in ongoing disputes with China, as legal precedent could challenge other tariffs. The Biden administration must find new, lawful tools to address issues like intellectual property theft and subsidies, likely through alliances and the World Trade Organization. America's trade strategy is returning to coalition building and international norms. With broad executive tariffs curtailed, the U.S. faces a turning point. The Biden administration and Congress must now collaborate on trade policy, shifting from executive orders to legislation. Expect renewed efforts to negotiate and update trade agreements, possibly rejoining regional pacts or forging new digital trade deals. The legislative process will be complex, with debates over labor, environment, and enforcement. Presidents may rely more on targeted sanctions and industrial policy, focusing on strengthening domestic industries rather than penalizing imports. The new approach will blend market opening with strategic protections, aiming for a balance between global competitiveness and worker security. The Supreme Court's decision clears the way for a more stable, constitutionally grounded trade policy. The Supreme Court's ruling marks a pivotal rebalancing of power, curbing the president's ability to use national security as a pretext for broad tariffs. The decision brings immediate economic shifts, relief for some, anxiety for others, and pushes U.S. trade policy toward international norms. Congress now reclaims its central role in shaping trade, promising a more stable but politically challenging process. The judiciary's intervention reaffirms constitutional limits and the separation of powers, ensuring economic policy remains within legal bounds. As the nation adapts, the court's role as a check on executive authority will shape the future of American trade and governance.